Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is a very gruesome and very sad one. Yeah. It was suggested to me by Brittany, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have, and if you have any more, please do let me know. It is the case of Addie Hall. Adrian Matthias Hall, Addie Hall as she was known to by everyone, was born on the 15th of January in 1976 in the US. I couldn't find her parents' name. It seems that, sadly they never really spoke out in public about it all. And I don't know whether they were close, whether they weren't close. I don't know anything, to be honest. But Addie is the victim of our story. She was known by many of her friends as being very, very creative and just a free spirit. She grew up in the Northeast originally, but she didn't have a great childhood. And it seems that this may be why her parents possibly aren't very close. I'm not speculating on anything, but it said that she was from a toxic household, and possibly abusive. Maybe that's why, we don't know anything about parents, but who knows. She then moved to New Orleans and she really, really got into her own. She enjoyed riding her bike. She would go down from the French Quarter to work every day, and that was her main form of transport. And she was going back to how creative she was. She didn't let that go to waste. She was a poet, a dancer, an artist. She was a seamstress. So she did so many things. But she also had inner demons too. She struggled with an undiagnosed bipolar disorder. She was known to get very aggressive and nasty towards her friends after having too many drinks. She also had a history of being in abusive relationships, sadly, and didn't want to fall into another one, which, great, obviously it's heartbreaking that she was in that position in the first place, but she set her mind to not falling into the same position again. And not long after is when she met Zach. Zach Bowen was born on the 15th of May in 1978 in Bakersfield, California. He spent the majority of his childhood within that area. He seemingly had a normal childhood, but sadly in high school he started to go into a depressive state, and this is when he decided that he needed a fresh start. He moved from Sacramento, California, where he was living with his mum, and he was going to high school, and then he decided to change that to New Orleans, Louisiana, to live with his father. Once he got there, he finished his education and he got a job as a bartender when he reached the age of 18. And this is where he met 28-year-old Lana Schupert. They immediately clicked. They began dating after not long, and Lana fell pregnant after being together not that long, actually, with Zach's first child. Even though he was really young, he embraced it. He got married to her and they welcomed their first son, Jackson. He decided to quit his job so he could be there to support his family, and he was gonna join the army. Now, during his time in the army, he did quite well. He rose to the rank of sergeant, but he suffered from bad PTSD. He saw some horrible things like a lot of people in the army have, one of which was this woman that he befriended was actually killed. I don't know if it was right in front of him. I think it might have been. He started to sort of... Oh no, it wasn't in front of him. It wasn't in front of him. He found out that she was actually killed through interacting with Americans. So, that was awful. He had a massive survivor's guilt because of it, which is just so heartbreaking. PTSD and the war is just awful. I believe that he started to fail his health things, maybe on purpose, I'm not entirely sure. But like I said, he was suffering. He suffered on the front lines for years after seeing all that horrific stuff, and he wanted to get back home to his family. He eventually was discharged, but he was hoping for an honourable discharge, and he just got a general discharge, and that meant that he wasn't entitled to the same kind of benefits of that. And he felt like he'd suffered all that time for essentially nothing, so that really, really got him down too. And he returns home. I believe before he returned home, Lana actually ended up saying that she didn't want to be with him anymore, so that was another blow to his to him, everything about him. When he got home, they started having tiffs and, you know, arguing and things like that, and it was just not a good place to be with them. And they weren't, obviously they were no longer together, but he still had to pay child support and things like that. And at that point, they had 2 children together. So Zach eventually went back to being a bartender, and this is where he met co-worker Addie Hall. So clearly both of them have, I guess you could call them like inner demons in a sense. And so Addie began flirting with Zach. She began sort of teasing him, things like that, seeing if he could handle what she was like. You know, that's exactly the kind of person that she was, and she wanted to see whether he would gel with her. But Zach was just fully interested in her from, you know, pretty much day one. They both got on really well. They both loved the nightlife. They both loved partying. They would have a lot to drink, and they would both partake in drugs by the sounds of it. And the drinking, they drank a lot. It was going to be a turbulent relationship from the start, because they were both like drinking a lot of alcohol, doing drugs, and they were both really energized, wanting to live life to the fullest and do all this crazy stuff, was seeking all this adrenaline. So yeah, you can imagine it was going to be a bit of a crazy relationship. They seemed to fall in love though. It went really well, and this was around about the time that New Orleans would be struck with Hurricane Katrina. And obviously it is well known in the world about Hurricane Katrina and the devastating effects it had on New Orleans. So they knowing that this hurricane is coming and heading towards them, a lot of residents was told, get out, you know, it's going to be huge, and it was huge. You need to evacuate. But Addie and Zach decided that they weren't going to do that. And even Lana asked Zach to evacuate with her and the kids, but he said no. And so he decided that he was going to sort of stay out the storm with Addie in her apartment. And Lana thought that that was a very reckless decision, but she couldn't really change his mind on it, and so that was that. Now, there was a small community of people that stayed behind when the hurricane hit. And once it had passed as well, like the damage that was done was crazy. So it meant that they had no electricity, they had no running water, no heat, no aircon. There was just not a lot of resources either. And you imagine that that's like you could compare it to a post-apocalyptic, you know, lifestyle really. And yet they loved it. They absolutely loved everything about it. They would go into bars that have long since been abandoned. They would collect loads of alcohol and make cocktails for everyone that stayed behind. And they would do that in replacement for food and water. So it was like currency, I guess. When it was getting dark, they would go out and find things to set on fire, and they would just light things up, like mattresses and stuff. And they would use that to cook on and to stay warm. It was like being out in the wilderness, I guess. And they even caught the attention of the media as well. They were featured in several newspapers, including the New York Times. People were describing them as the king and queen of Hurricane Katrina survivalists. And at that point, Addie and Jack were just completely in love with each other. And they loved that lifestyle, okay? They were in their element, both of them together. But obviously, life will return back to normal. And when it did, and people started to move back into New Orleans, and things were started to get electric again, water again, this is when their relationship really started to take a downward spiral. Zach seemingly didn't want anything to do with his ex-wife and kids. I believe he still loved her though as well. But he didn't want to pay child support anymore, things like that. Addie didn't really want to have to deal with that side of him. Like she wanted Zach, but didn't want to have to deal with his kids and his ex-wife. They started arguing constantly. They started complaining about the other person to their friends and people around them. They would have physical altercations and fight all of the time. And they would quite often break up and get back together. And like I said, they were still drinking a lot and doing the hard stuff too. So that didn't help anything. This went on for like several months. And the relationship was really toxic at this point. So they decided that enough was enough. They were going to end it. Well, Zach wanted to end it for good, but Addie kind of wanted to give it one last chance. And she actually tricked him into giving it one last go. When walking past this apartment one day above this, I think it was called Voodoo Palace or something like that, they saw a for rent sale. Oh my gosh, speak English. They saw a for rent sign. That's it. And so they decided that with this fresh new start that they were going to give each other, they were going to move into there together. and start again, kind of. So they both signed like the lease and things, and then not long after, Addie found out that, you know, Zach was cheating on her. She went to the landlord and asked for the apartment to be put in her name only, and he wrote out this letter saying that he hopes that they can get back together or sort it out or something like that. And she kicked Zach out, but that was the final straw for Zach. He completely snapped. And that is what led to the horrific things that would happen on the 5th of October in 2006. So let's skip forward a while. So we're gonna go to the 17th of October in 2006, and it was about 8:30, and the police received a disturbing phone call. It was from the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel, and there was a man's body on top of the roof, the parking garage's roof. So the police hurry over and they find this man. Obviously he had actually jumped, so you know, he would have been in a horrible state. They didn't know whether he jumped though at the time, so they investigate whether this was like an accident, whether he fell, whether it was foul play, or whether it was intentional, and they look for ID to try and identify him, and they find a note in his pocket. Part of the note read, "This is not accidental. I take my own life for the one I took. If you send a patrol to 826N Rampant, you will find the dismembered corpse of my girlfriend Addie in the oven, on the stove, and in the fridge, along with full documentation on the both of us and a full signed confession from myself, Zach Bowen." So, of course, upon reading this horrific thing, police go rushing over to that apartment, and what they discover inside is horrific. Something out of like a horror movie. So they go in, and it is freezing cold in there, but it was quite a warm day, but it was freezing cold in there, and there was a reason for that. They found on the walls, they had all these spray painted messages, haunting messages. There were things on the wall that said like, "Don't look," and one of the messages directed them to the stove. And in the pot on one of the burners, they found a human. It was burnt beyond all recognition. In another pot, they found hands and feet inside the oven. In this large roasting pan were arms and legs also burnt, and investigators said that there seemed to be a seasoning on the limbs. And on the counter next to the stove, they had potatoes and carrots that were all cut up. Inside the fridge was a large plastic bag, and inside that they found Addie's torso. And as horrifying as all of that already is, what they found written in Addie's journal was even more creepy and eerie and horrific. So there was an 8-page confession that Zach had written in Addie's journal, and he described what he did next. He said, "I killed her at 1 a.m. Thursday the 5th of October. I very calmly strangled her. It was very quick. After killing her, he abused the corpse. The next morning, he got up and went to work. He came home, put her in the bathtub, and this is when he dismembered her, and then he meticulously cleaned the bathroom. He spent 4 days deciding on what to do with Addie's remains, and during that time he went about his life like normal. His friend said that he was in good spirits. They spoke to him of going on vacation, and in his confession he went on about how he wanted to enjoy the last days on earth to the fullest, including good foods, good drugs, and good strippers. It was apparent that he only dismembered her to make her easier to deal with, I guess, to get rid of. And despite the horrific way in which the crime scene was laid out, there was no evidence that he had consumed any of her. His body was covered in cigarette butt-like burns, and that was also dictated in his confession. He said that he burnt himself for every year. He burnt himself once for every year that he'd been a failure. He also wrote, "I scared myself not only by the action of calmly strangling the woman I've loved for 1.5 years, but by my entire lack of remorse. I've known forever how horrible a person I am. Ask anyone." And finally, to put, like, if all of that wasn't enough, they checked the security cameras of the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel, and they clearly showed Zach Bowen approaching the terrace and then, like, backing off again, looking over it, like, several times, until finally he downed a drink and then he went overboard willingly. So honestly, this case really, like, shocked me. Murder-suicide, absolutely horrific. I know that they both had their issues, but yeah, it didn't really need to lead to any of that, but there you go. If you guys have enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you want to. I want to see more cases like this. yeah. But yeah, that is all I have today on the case of Addie Hall. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.